Roll call, please.
Mr. Bird?
Here.
Mr. Curtis?
Here.
Mr. Stone?
Here.
Mr. Bartley?
Here.
Mr. Kaiser?
Here.
Mr. Ulrich?
Here.
Mr. Green?
Here.
All right, would you all please rise and join me in the pledge of allegiance? Jeff, are there any additions or amendments to the agenda?
No, we have no changes.
No changes. Public concerns. I have one card. Bob, you're up.
Good evening. Is this working? We have a lot of issues going on in the community these days, and I'd like you to consider a couple of things. Spent a lot of time down here. I spent a lot of time down here, and you did a lot of things. You did the inspections for the lateral, which is going to help us preserve our groundwater, which we have precious little of. But I'd like you to consider doing something else along with that inspection at the same time. If we're going to be there, we have the point of sale, we have the groundwater issue going on with the lateral, the cameras. I would really like you to consider a way to make it mandatory to have an inspection on rain gutters so we're not losing that water into the system. Your rules show that people can't do that, yet it's not one of those things that are inspected. So we're getting critically short, and we can't have our water being flushed down as though it needed to be processed water down to the plant. We need to keep what we can here. The next thing I'd like you to consider, because it's coming, I swear to God, it might not be in 5 years, but I'll be standing here in 10 years and hope to see you. We're going to be using some of our reprocessed water, and I think what you can do now is you can start changing things. Let's get away from the arcane of sanitary district. I think that's really great. But what you folks really do is water purification. That's what your business is. You purify the water. You process and purify. So I'd like you folks to think about a different name that's more suitable for today's environment. And I really think you're the Ojai Community Purification, Water Purification District, or something to that, because it'll make it a little easier when toilet to tap becomes a reality. It won't be such a big leap of faith. It will be around for a while. So I think words count a little bit, and I think the image counts, and the old image of the sanitary district. What you folks are doing is you're turning out some awfully pure water. And you've really processed that thing down, what, 35 parts per million? Down to 3 parts, is that correct, Jeff? That's a staggeringly good job. And I think you should take credit for it, and I think you should really consider your name change to really reflect what you do. And that's water purification.
Would you say the name again? Water?
Ojai Community Water Purification District. Or any other scrambled alphabet soup that you can come up with that conveys the message. But sewer district and sanitary district, kind of passe. Anyhow, thank you for your work. The last thing is if we can find a way, I don't know if this is legal, I don't know if you can share, it seems like it's public, you seem to be adding a lot of units. You seem to be adding a lot of ancillary units. And all those ancillary units you folks add, if they're in the right area of the old Golden State Water District, have got a water bond. 59.1% of the people in the city of Ojai, plus we've got about 3,000 of these things. And for every undiscovered unit, because this bond is by parcel, by dwelling, I would appreciate you folks having a way to communicate these extra units, because they need, or are not entitled to, they have to pay a bond fee for the purchase of Golden State. So if you're spending the time and you're discovering them, it makes it easy. Now that we have a total lack of communication with the city, it's going to make it much tougher, but the bond unit is a separate entity. It's not going to fight between the different entities to see who's on first and who's got one item. it's about fairness to the people paying that $60 million bond back. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. Any other public comment from anyone in the audience? Okay, we will move on to the consent items. 6 and 7. Pleasure of the board.
Move to approve.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Will you call the roll, please?
Yes. Mr. Berg,
Yes.
Mr. Curtis,
Yes.
Mr. Stone,
Yes.
Mr. Kaiser,
Yes.
Mr. Ulrich,
Yes.
Mr. Green,
Yes.
and then Mr. Green, you need to abstain from voting on item 6.
Okay.
And, Mr. Ulrich, did I say that your name tonight? Yes.
Yes, you did.
Okay, all right, it passes.
Don't leave me.
Oh, Mr. Baggerly, sorry.
Thank you, yes.
I got all cut up in spam, and
know.
I forgot, I knew there was somebody else I needed to call on.
Just
Just skipped my mind.
Okay, we're going to move on to item 8. This is an administrative appeal hearing. Appeal of General Manager's ruling dated June 29, 2018 regarding 602 East Oak Street, Ojai, California. That's the property. Jeff.
So before you is the board letter related to 602 East Oak Street. And on each of your desks is a bound document which includes some filed documents that go with the processing of that property, and the applicant's here to also provide input to you for your review. This is a property on Oak Street that had an existing unit on the front, and the property owner wanted to put a care facility on the rear of the property. Go ahead.
Jeff, I just have to interrupt at this point in time. If I can just do one housekeeping matter, and this is pursuant to your resolution 2013-10. For any type of an appeal hearing right now, we need to have disclosures of any ex parte contacts prior to the conduct of this hearing. So let me just read to you the key section of resolution 2013-10. If any board member is exposed to information or evidence about the matter outside of this hearing, through contacts with constituents, district staff, the appellant, or through any other contact, the member shall disclose all such contacts and/or evidence acquired which is not otherwise included in the written or oral staff report. So basically, does anybody who is hearing this matter now, have they received any information that is relevant to this matter, but that is not included in either the staff report for item number 8 or in the documentation presented to you right now? If you do have information to that extent, please state the type of information that is, so that everyone in the room, in particular the appellants, will know what information you have at your disposal. So let me just ask, are there any disclosures from any of the board members given that admonition?
Council, would you do a poll, please?
Okay, Mr. Green, do you have any disclosures?
No.
Mr. Ulrich?
No.
Mr. Kaiser?
No.
Mr. Baggerly?
No.
Mr. Stone?
No.
Mr. Curtis?
No.
And Mr. Berg?
No.
Okay, so we have that, and so that takes care of that item, so you can proceed with your hearing at this point in time.
The other thing is that the reason for ex parte communications is that everybody gets to have the same information for this hearing. And no one has something that the other party hasn't heard, seen, or read. And it's due process.
That's correct.
So, let's see.
I'm sorry, Jeff.
You going to start?
Yes. So, we found out about this project in early 2014.
Do we need to time this?
No, I'm only going to take a few minutes.
Okay.
We found out about this project in early 2014 through keeping track of and reading a planning commission agenda from the city of Ojai. Prior to that, the city had not asked for a will serve, and we didn't have any information that the project existed. We found out about it, and sent an application to the architect who was listed on the Planning Commission information, and asked them to fill out an application and provide information to us as what was going on with the project. And through early 2014, through about January to almost June, we went back and forth with the architect about what the project was and whether or not there would be any impacts or needs for additional sewer. At the time, our records indicated, and we were billing for 2 units at the site. It was obvious in terms of talking to the applicant's agent and the architect at the time that the new project would require more sewer than that. We went back through some records, and prior to 1985, found that the city of Ojai had at one time permitted the property for 5 capacity units, but had only billed the property for 2 because of the existing uses. So we upped the authorized count on the project to 5 because that's what the city had permitted prior to consolidation in 1985. But that still didn't answer the question in terms of what the new project was going to be. In order for then the city to continue processing, in about June, they asked for a letter saying that the project was served by sewer. We provided a currently being served letter, the first of which was on June 18th of 2014, and said the property was permitted for 5 units. Over the course of about 2.5 years, through the city review process, through most of 2015 and into late 2016, the city was going through its land use process, what the project was, what was included, how many units would be included, what the architecture would be, all of those sort of normal land use questions. And over the course of that long period of time, there was conversations back and forth with us. It was still unclear as to what the ultimate project was going to be. It was still going to be a care facility, but what kind, how it was configured. There were numerous sorts of architectural plans that were provided. On this kind of facility, this is a commercial facility, and so we count the fixture units, the plumbing fixture units, on a project, and every 25 fixture units is 1 capacity unit. And so there were various counts about kitchens and bathrooms and sinks, and showers, and we provided 3 additional updated will serve letters, or currently being served letters, in 2016, the latest occurring in September of 2016. One of the things that happened as the project went through the city was the city required that it was a 2-story facility, that the facility the ground floor had a number of rooms and a kitchen and bathrooms. But on the 2nd floor, the space above was actually divided into 2 apartments. And those apartments were then to be required to only be used by people that were caring for the residents downstairs. And so what it turned into over time was, instead of just a single care facility, it was a ground floor care facility and an upstairs sort of residential unit. And the city put a land use restriction on the upstairs to only be rented to people that were actually caring for the people downstairs. This is kind of a hybrid sort of facility, in that some of the units are counted as fixture units, and some of them are counted by actual individual standalone units. We have this situation on a number of hotels. The Ojai Valley Inn has rooms which are not rented full time, and they don't have kitchens, but they do have a few cottages that are standalone units. It's also the same thing as the Blue Iguana Inn, where you have some hotel rooms, but you also have some that are standalone sort of cottage and full-service standalone units. And so we have this combination where we count fixture units for part of it, and we count dwelling units for part of it, and we add up to a total. Through all the twists and turns of this over a number of years, it turns out that the final project included 6 capacity units. So rather than the original 2 that were on the site, the new project in a hybrid form added up to 4 additional capacity units. The site was permitted for 5, and the final project required 6. When we went through the final inspection and determined that, we've provided the applicant and the property owner a letter that says, hey, the final project includes these 6 rather than 5, and so we required or asked for the property owner to pay for an additional 1 capacity unit so that the site is permitted for 6 and that the 6 that are there are all permitted. So that's kind of where we are. In this attached package, we have included a timeline of all of the sort of significant milestones over the 4-year process. We've included a couple of letters, including the 4 currently being served letters, and a number of pieces of documentation that show the back and forth as the project went through the City of Ojai sort of design review and the architect's revision. And we went through a number of fixture unit counts over the time, constantly sort of changing those numbers as the project changed. The final project, as I said, is a hybrid. It's part of the ground floor is fixture unit counts, the upstairs is 2 individual standalone apartments, and so the total required new is 4, adding up to a total of 6. One of the things that comes up sometimes on cases is that these projects include special conditions by the city. That means that the upstairs units can only be rented to care providers. Now, although that's a city condition, that's not something that enters into sort of our review of a project. Whether it's required to be rented to care persons today and is changed or not changed or goes through some process over time, we don't keep track of what a unit is required to be according to the city. What we keep track of is what is the space and how does it meet the definitions of our code. And so those 2 upstairs units under our code are standalone independent apartments. They could be rented to anybody, and that's not really something that we, from a regulatory perspective, keep track of or try and regulate in any way whatsoever. We only keep track of how many fixture units do you have, how many apartment units do you have, what's the total number of units on the site, and how does it meet our code. So as we stand today, the site owns 5, and they're required to have 6. And that was the opinion letter and the distinctions of staff that we provided to the applicant. They have appealed to you for discussion and for review.
Thank you. Anything else?
No, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Any questions from the board? Mr. Pettit? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Jeff, looking through this packet, thank you again for providing this. It did go before the City Planning Commission.
Yes.
Did it ever go before the Building Appeals Board?
I don't know what the regulatory process was at the city. We don't ever investigate that. We really stay really focused on, from a plumbing perspective, what do they have, what do they own, what is the project, and I think one of the things that we get from time to time is the question over when and how do we charge. And for instance, the bowling alley is connected to our sewer, yet it has got a chain on the door and has been for a number of years. They still pay full sewer service charges for that site because at a moment's notice, that lock could be opened and those bathrooms or those facilities could be used. And so, since we don't have control over when something is used or not used, or when it is open or not open, our code requires that those sewer service charges be paid, whether it is open or not. And so, the same goes for these 2 units on the upstairs. It's 2 standalone apartments. We charge it the same way we do the cottages at the Blue Iguana Inn or the Ojai Valley Inn or anywhere else where there's a completely separate standalone unit that meets the definition of our single dwelling unit.
Anything else?
That's it.
Board members, any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Jeff, on the upstairs apartments, Are the property owners aware of the specific items that make up an additional dwelling unit? Those items that we've defined as creating an additional dwelling unit.
Yes, we talked, I'm not sure what the design process was and why the city made the decision and how the use and operation of the facility required that those be standalone units. Why they're there, why the city conditioned them, how they're going to be used in a functional basis for the care facility. And those are questions of operation and questions of city oversight of the project. But the upstairs units have their own independent access. There's stairs up to the door. Inside they have bedrooms, a living area, bathrooms, and a fully operating kitchen. And so they are standalone units. And when you're inside that unit, it's no different than being in any other sort of dwelling unit, whether that's an apartment or a house. And so, it's not really a commercial, full-blown facility where the kitchen and the bathrooms and the bedrooms are all connected like you would see in maybe a rest home or something. It's a standalone unit, and there's 2 of them on the upper floor.
So they're aware of what items may or may not be changed or modified or removed in order to avoid being an extra dwelling.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Exactly what is the appeal? You determined that this was an extra dwelling unit that had to be connected cable. And they're appealing that decision.
Correct.
It's a capacity unit, Stan. It's not just a dwelling unit. It's either a combination of dwelling units and fixtures that add up to another capacity unit. We had 5, and the number came up to 6. Okay? Mr. Patterson, your turn.
Thank you for letting us be here tonight. My name is Bill Lindsay. I'm with RWC. We were the designer and contractor on the project. I'm actually here on behalf of the press tonight. And Jeff and I, just to disclose, we did have a meeting with the property owners prior to tonight's hearing. And as we went through it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but I believe at the time we'd gone through this, you weren't employed here at that time, is that correct? When this initially started?
I've been here 7 years, so, I don't know if it started back before my time.
Okay. The other reason I was just curious is a couple of things I just wanted to clarify on your timeline, just reference points. For the most part, we went through it, I talked to Perez, it does match with what you had talked about on this, according to it. I just want to clarify that the front unit is an existing assisted living facility currently, so it's had that use. It wasn't converted, that had always been, and had a conditional use permit to operate in that capacity. It is all on one site, one parcel. As we begin to look at developing out the second unit, if you will, the city and in their entitlement process, it's kind of an ever-changing target, moving. There's, conditions that come from every agency. And in Ojai, everybody understands the difficulty, the sensitivities to what we have to go through in order to be able to, basically increase their capacity of what's going on there. So I just wanted to talk through a couple keynotes on that it is a commercial facility, and so because it's a commercial facility is the reason we have to have a conditional use permit. So within that, the city does require that to have its own conditional use permit be modified. So today, we could not go, as you referred to, the upper 2 units. The Perez family cannot go out and just put that on the open market to rent it to whoever they want. And in fact, it's currently has in the entitlements to be part of the assisted living. So currently the Perez family is living upstairs in it. They're employed there obviously and own it. But if they were to move out and wish to just rent it to anybody, they cannot do that. They're deed restricted. And in the idea of the will serve letters that come from your guys' district, we would have to come back at any modification and ask for that request to be made due to additional impacts, modification to the floor plan. It would come right back here today. No different than they're doing some improvements in the front unit. They're not changing any fixture count, and just kind of incidentally decided here the 20th that they got a letter from the Ojai Valley Sanitation District asking for them to come in and do a survey again of the front. I would also ask if we're looking at that there's no additional fixture counts. It stayed the same. They're just basically upgrading walls, decor, bathroom fixture counts, plumbing fixture counts remained the same. We did start correspondence, and I want to say we had a conceptual review, and I want to say that maybe dates back to early 2014-15, where you actually put an application in front of the city that's a conceptual review. So prior to starting through the entire CUP process, you have an evaluation and get some sort of feedback from the Planning Commission and the city as to exactly what staff really would like to see. In that, there was some just phone conversations that went back and forth with the sanitation district. As we move forward, and the city did request that we have some sort of current will serve letter or some sort of documentation that the sanitation would be able to handle the additional capacity. Those were given on several different dates, and I believe Jeff had listed those out. If not, I do have copies of each one of those that listed. There was a total of 4 or 5. Can you confirm it was 4 or 5?
There were 4 updated letters.
Thank you, Jeff. So the reason, I just want to clarify, the reason for those is every time we get close to having an expiration on, let's say we couldn't meet the fire department requirements, every time I went back in as another correction needed to be made or time continued to go on, we have to come back and still make sure that we are able to have, each of the letters are identical. They all say the exact same thing. The only thing that's changing on them is the date is what continues to change on them. So I have copies of those. I don't know if there was minor things, but I believe they're all the same. It's just we're changing the date. I'm just wanting to set the background so you guys have that understanding of this process to get it done. And we're here tonight primarily because as we have emails with the sanitation staff on establishing what the fixture counts were, really we're just asking and pleading on their behalf is that when you look at the fixture counts, they cannot rent the upstairs units to anybody. If it does go to rent to somebody, they got to go back through a modification, which comes back to you to have that reevaluated. So currently, the way we interpret your guys' code and the definitions that are here today before us, we don't find where it is 6 units. We still agree with the original fixture count and would ask on behalf of the press that you guys would consider that. And really, as he mentioned, this is a hybrid. It's a standalone project. There's not, even as he referenced several of the other projects, we're not really comparing apples to apples. That evaluation was completely different. They can rent that on the open market. Today, the Perez family cannot rent this on the open market. Again, it is absolutely deed restricted. If they rented it to somebody, they would have a violation and they could not operate. So they cannot just rent it out on the open market. There were no appeals board. Somebody asked a question earlier in regards to building and safety, if there was an appeal through that. There was not an appeal. Tonight is really the first appeal that we have in regards to any of the conditions that were on the project. There were no prior appeals. And again, we just ask, as this is a standalone issue, that we really consider this being handled as fixture counts both upstairs and below, and that you guys take that into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Questions?
Yes. What was your name again?
My name is Bill Lindsay.
Thank you, Mr. Lindsay.
Question. Why were the 2 apartments considered by the planning commission and had that condition put on where they couldn't be rented? Why?
Primarily, this happens quite a bit. We do quite a bit of conditional use permits throughout Ventura County. This is not uncommon, and they want consistent use. So they do not want to have somebody on that site that's not going to be compatible, if you will, with their current operation of an assisted care facility. So they want to have staffing, somebody there that they can have consistency Compatibility is what they're looking for, and there's several projects that could get deed restricted for this reason.
Any other questions?
Are you saying that this one is deed restricted?
It is, absolutely, yeah.
It's part of the conditions.
It's part of the conditions of approval, and yeah, and that's, for us, we have to, and then just to kind of throw out, for what it's worth here, is we feel we're almost being penalized. The city, if we could rent it to anybody, the press tonight would be happy to make payment arrangements and go forward paying the sanitation district. Unfortunately, they just can't rent it to anybody. So they got penalized there. Delays that are on all sides, and there's no finger pointing whatsoever. We're here in the spirit of trying to get it resolved, but they cannot rent it to anybody. So they feel like they're then again being penalized for this thing they've already been deed restricted, and they come back and go, hey, you got additional separate units. And quite frankly, to tell you some of the reasons there's an exterior entrance to this is there is no room. They have 10 units that are inside, mandated by the state. You can walk through it. The fire department, I can give you the list of conditions that came from the fire department. We cannot, there's no other room to be able to get them and meet all the ADA requirements and still get to the upstairs units.
Do they have people assisting them in operating that facility?
That is correct, yes. They work there 7 days a week. Yes.
Okay, and why couldn't those people live in the apartments?
So they could, though, that actually could go on. So anybody that's there, that's part of that care facility can utilize those upstairs, but they could not rent it on the open market.
Granted, but that's why they put it there, so there would be people there to take care of those people within there, on site. That's
Jack,
commercial, why that make it.
I'm sorry, but this is kind of irrelevant because the sanitary district doesn't have anything to do with land use.
And would agree. What we were looking at, though, is if you look at your definition tonight in that, and again, we have some emails that dialogue back and forth with your staff, and at the time that this was done, staff agreed with us on the fixture count. After it was reviewed, it has come back with the general manager. We had a meeting and he looked at it and said, no guys, we have a difference of opinions here. I believe, and with all due respect to Jeff, he viewed it as, hey, these are separate units, standalone. No argument here, they are standalone units. However, they cannot be rented to the public. Therefore, the entire use in its consistency is based on fixture count. We can't take and change when we want to use the fixture count and then go back to, let's say, separate units based on an entrance or how it's done. Under your current definition and what it is deemed to be used, it is all based on fixture count, and that's what we actually based our permits on, is fixture counts. When that came to you is how we arrived at the number of fixture counts. And I have those, I'm sure you guys have it in the packet as well, in terms of what the fixture count would be if it was based on fixture count. And it's a unique situation. It really is very unique. But again, I come before you to ask, is that if it is deed restricted, therefore it's for the entire facility. If we take the argument you're making, it is only for those that work there. Therefore, it'd be under fixture count.
But Mr. Lindsay, you don't seem to understand. We don't care who rents it or uses it. We're saying that it's a standalone dwelling unit, and we have that in our ordinance. We don't care who lives in it or who you're charging rent or whether or not they work at the facility or not.
So if we were to ask the city under this to reclassify it, that they're not separate dwelling units, can we proceed and postpone this hearing so that we could have the city give us a letter to present to you guys that it's basically one unit?
Jeff?
The conflict is real here. In its forgetting what the city has deed restricted it, as it stands with the walls and the doors and the kitchens and the bathrooms and forgive the sort of simplistic, the boxes add up to 6. 2 for the front, which were existing and are still existing, and 4 for the back, based on where the boxes are. If you count the downstairs by fixture units and the 2 upstairs by 2 independent units, then it adds up to 6. If the upstairs didn't have separate units, if it didn't have the walls the way the walls are, it would only add up to 5. But
Okay, wait a minute. If they put a door that opens both ways like
not just a door that opens both ways, because our code says that it has to have an independent access. If the upstairs was all one space, not 2 separate boxes, then it would only add up to 5, and then there wouldn't be any purchase. But because of the configuration of the boxes, the walls, the doors, the kitchens, the bathrooms, everything, those 2 upstairs are 2 independent units, and the bottom, if you count up the fixture units, is another 2. So it's 4 total for the new facility. If you added up all the fixture units and you ignored the independent access in the walls, the total of the back unit would only be 3 additional, plus the 2 front, for 5 total. But because the city required that the upstairs be separate boxes and be only rented then, in their words, to somebody caring for the facility, they created the scenario that we have now, which is there's 2 downstairs by count and 2 upstairs by separation. And so, since we don't look at the use, and we don't look at the conditions and the land use sorts of questions, and we don't have any authority over that process, we look at it as the box itself. And the box itself is 2 upstairs and 2 downstairs by fixture unit.
Let me ask my question again. If you go to a hotel and there's a door that goes from one room to the next, is that considered 1 unit when the door is open?
Well, in our code, if it has an independent access, now the 2 upstairs both have a front door. If you had a door between the units that can be locked,
Yeah.
you now have 2 independent uses.
Still.
If you had a doorway between the 2 upstairs unit, if you had 2 front doors, but you had an open passageway between the 2 units, no lockable door, even if you have 2 kitchens, if you have 1 space, then it is only 1 unit.
So just the question, if we follow that, downstairs we have 10 bedrooms with lockable doors, separate outside entrances to each one of those.
That downstairs is already taken care of.
No, but if we're basing it on the scenario he just gave you on lockable doors and separate entrances, we have that same situation downstairs.
Well, if you look at the definition of a single dwelling unit, a single dwelling unit has its own independent access. It has a bedroom, a bathroom, and a kitchen. It has an independent, complete, whole living space, like any apartment, condo, house. It can have 3 or 4 outside entrances. But if the space has a bedroom, a bathroom, and a kitchen, it's a single dwelling unit.
Yep.
Upstairs, there are 2 of those. They have 2 front doors, 2 kitchens, bedrooms and bathrooms separated by wall, and there's no connection between those 2 units. They're 2 independent spaces. Downstairs, they have 1 kitchen. They have a whole bunch of rooms, but each of those rooms is not a dwelling unit because each room does not have a kitchen, a bedroom, and a bathroom in it. There's a whole bunch of independent rooms, some common bathrooms, and a common kitchen. So that is counted under a commercial fixture unit basis. Because there's not 10 units downstairs. There's only 1 kitchen downstairs. Upstairs, there are 2 kitchens, 2 exit doors, and a wall between them. So in a hotel scenario, if you had a hotel room and you have that old double door that goes both ways with the deadbolt both ways, and both of the hotel rooms have a bedroom, a bathroom, and a full kitchen in them, then they're 2 independent units, and most hotels don't have the kitchen facility, and so they're counted on a fixture unit basis. When we go through the Ojai Valley Inn or any other hotel, we walk through each room and count the shower, the toilet, the sink in each room because it's a fixture unit. If we go through on certain hotels where they have these cottages, where they have these separate cabanas that are for long-term stay, and they have a bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen, and independent access, and they're an independent, completely whole dwelling unit, that counts as 1, even if you then have a whole bunch of hotel rooms that are counted by fixture unit. Exactly the situation we have here. Bottom floor is fixture unit counts because it's not 10 units, it's 10 rooms, but because it doesn't have 10 kitchens and 10 bathrooms, it's not 10 units. The upstairs is the complicating part because it is 2 separate boxes. The city laid on this condition that it only be rented to people that care there. That's their land use, conditional use permit sort of discretionary process that we don't get involved in. But as the box stands, it's 2 plus counted 2.
Okay. Mr. Lindsay, I'm going to give you 5 minutes for final comments.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Oh,
Can I ask a question?
go ahead.
Is there a fire separation? Fire-rated assembly separating the two units on the second floor?
There is actually a fire separation below and upstairs, yes. There are several fire separations for this.
But I mean, down this.
Yes, there's fire separations through it. And again, we're not here to argue today in terms of the separate boxes that we're identifying. Clarification, this is a unique situation. We have really mulled this over. Very unique. However, again, we're looking at it as a hotel. This is not a hotel facility. It is one commercial unit facility. And again, we are just asking that it be considered to look at that. If the sanitation district decides that, we see them as 6, we would also ask this evening that payment arrangements be made for that. However, before we get to that, I would just ask in closing that you please consider that this is a unique situation and have an understanding of that.
Let me make it clear, okay, Mr. Lindsay? You're asking that the 2 upstairs units not be looked at as dwelling units, but as fixture counts.
That is correct because of the same.
Well, I just wanted to make sure that everybody on the board
Correct.
understands, okay? Thank you very much. I'll give the general manager 5 minutes to make final comments.
I don't have any comments at this point.
Okay. Well, then I guess you don't have any response to his no comment, right? Okay. Let's see. I'm going to ask General Counsel to advise the board of applicable law in this regard. Go ahead, Robert.
Just a few points that have been highlighted by both the appellant and by the general manager. The first being that OVSD is a sanitary special district. Your job, as set forth by statute, is to provide sanitary sewer facilities, essential public services to your jurisdiction. That is your primary purpose. And so your primary purpose is to ensure that those facilities are taken care of and that any burden that is placed on the system thus pays a corresponding fee or charge. That leads me to Chapter 3 of your Code of Regulations, which sets forth all the fees, charges, and units and how that is calculated, and that is the basis upon which your general manager has determined the number of units involved and the amount of money that ought to be paid by this facility. And within that section, that Chapter 3, is a section with regards to some of the leeway or some of the discretion that is involved in that process that your general manager has available to him upon his use upon certain circumstances. So this brings up the whole thing of the hybrid use. There's nothing in Section 3 that talks about this hybrid use as being so different that it should not pay for the fees that are set forth in Chapter 3. So that's clear. It's also clear that the OVSD does not have land use authority to determine what is a particular unit and whether or not it should be deed restricted for whatever purpose, whether for the purposes of supplying workforce housing, as in this case, or for any other reason. We are given the land use decision by the land use agency, and we are to abide by that to the extent that it is possible without doing violence to your own regulations. So it really is a Chapter 3 situation, and whether or not Chapter 3 allows for this, and it's really your call based on the evidence whether or not your general manager has acted within Chapter 3, and whether or not the appellant has made a sufficient case to say that Chapter 3 does not apply, which would then give you some sort of leeway to fashion a remedy. I think I also heard the appellant say that if in fact your board would decide that there are 6 units, that there is open to you some sort of payment plan. And if I look at the options that are before you, it basically states in your board letter that based on the evidence presented tonight, not just on the general manager's report, but all the evidence received at tonight's hearing, you have several options. And I'll just look at one. Option 2 says to affirm the general manager's June 29, 2018 ruling as to the number of capacity units on the property with conditions on the amount and the payment of capacity and sewer services charge. So that would give you right there and then the ability to fashion some sort of payment remedy if in fact you felt that that was justified given the circumstances presented by the appellant. So it's very much a straight Chapter 3 issue here. Your hearing was conducted pursuant to Chapter 9 and to Resolution 2013-10, so that procedurally this is proper and it really is before you on that basis.
Thank you, Robert, appreciate that. Judge, do you want to give us your recommendation for the option?
Well, it's really, a decision based on, as Robert said, on Chapter 3. The way staff has interpreted the project, if we look at the project as it stands, it's 2 + 2. That would be option 2. The applicants asked for a payment plan. We have 3 options that are allowable by the board and at the owner's discretion which one they choose. They include a 5-year, a 10-year, or a 15-year payment plan. The 5 years are no interest. Up to 15 years can be put, on an agreement to pay, but over a 15-year period on the tax rolls. So option 2 is confirming the letter that staff wrote to the applicant, and the options for payment are included or at the owner's discretion how they want to do that. If you selected option 2 here, we would then work with the applicant and give them the options to decide which payment option you wanted, and that agreement would come back to you for ratification at the next board meeting if we could get it done in time.
Thank you. Well,
Question.
yes, go ahead.
Since Section 3 is the focus of this issue, of this matter.
Can't hear you back here.
Excuse me. Since Section 3 is the linchpin of this issue, how would you say, Mr. Palmer, either the applicability or the non-applicability of Section 301, 12, I think it is 12.4. Yes, 301.12.4 mixed-use structures. Is that applicable, especially the second paragraph, where it starts, the general manager is authorized to waive the trunk sewer capacity charge for that portion of a mixed-use structure that is used for non-residential use upon a determination that all the following conditions are satisfied.
The way I've looked at 301.12.4 mixed-use structures is looking at the predominant use. And the predominant use in this case is that the space in this configuration is a residential space, but it is a single dwelling unit configuration. One of the things that we have not done, that although it's been discussed here, is discussing how when the city puts special conditions on a space that are completely within their independent and sole discretionary area of expertise, that they've conditioned this space, the upstairs units, to only be rented to people that are in the care facility employment, does not, in my opinion, change that predominant use. And we've never kind of used that as a way of keeping track of, in our permitting structure, city discretionary type conditions, because we have no control over what they say, how they say it, when they change it, nor are we regularly notified of things that occur. And so when we look at predominant use, we look at predominant physical use, which is, in this case, a residential standalone dwelling unit.
Okay, that section goes on to say the residential and non-residential portions of the structure are in the possession of and occupied by the same person or persons, and the non-residential use of the structure is incidental and secondary to the structure's residential use. Examples of non-residential uses that may be incidental and secondary to a structure's residential use include, without limitation, home offices, live-work quarters, hobby shops, and art or craft studio spaces. 3, the structure is primarily used for non-residential purposes by the same person or persons who use the structure for residential purposes. And 4, members of the public do not regularly access the structure for any non-residential purpose. So while some of this seems like it might be contrary, in particular, it makes reference to live-work quarters.
Correct, but the predominant use is still residential because this is an apartment. The only flavor of
Aren't live-work quarters apartments over work?
no, because
space?
you could have, this is not an insurance office, you know, as a secondary use. This is not a dress shop as a secondary use. In the VMU code section for the city of Ojai, you can have a live-work where you can have a residential portion and you can have a very specific commercial portion. In this case, what is occurring here, it's all the same use. The apartments are residential. It's not, the only condition difference is that it can only be rented to somebody who works there. This is no different than my opinion of the city saying, hey, we're going to have housing units here in the city of Ojai, but they can only be rented to certain kinds of people and they can only live here in the city of Ojai. It's still an apartment. It is not a dual use. It is a residential use. It's only conditional who can live there.
Stan,
Yeah, I understand that this is not a hybrid, but an unusual set of conditions. Normally, if this were residentially zoned, we would have no question that these are apartments and that they have all of the facilities for being charged and connected to our system as an apartment and a dwelling unit. However, with the limitation of it, I can see that there could be a question about if you limit who can live there or what it is that they can do there, or that it's attached to a set of conditions, I think maybe the board has the right to say there is a special condition and we should make an allowance for the fact that they are limiting the use of these, not like they would with a residentially zoned apartment, but that it is part of a conditional use permit, that there are limitations on what you can do with it. And maybe we need to open up our thinking and say, this is a hybrid condition where we are told you cannot use it for whatever you want. You can't rent it to anybody who can buy the rental. So that maybe we have to come up with another arrangement or another consideration that this is not residential because it's been limited in terms of who can live there. That does change the dynamics.
That is the essence of the conversation. Steve.
Okay.
I mean, that is the essence of the conversation. On a plumbing fixture box configuration, it's 2 standalone apartments. It's got this special flavor that it's been painted with by the city, that it can only be rented to someone who works there. If the board wants to use this as a project and say it meets special considerations in the board's opinion, that it can be counted differently,
Okay.
purely the whole thing on fixture unit counts, you, the board, can make that decision. And then if you did count it entirely by just counting
What?
fixture units,
What would you recommend to the board, since we have the power to change the rules for a situation which doesn't fit our regular rules? What would be your recommendation you might make that might modify our usual way of dealing with this? Yes, it is different.
yes, it is. Without making a recommendation, my concern is that we don't have any authority in the land use arena that either the city or in some cases the county can place these kinds of conditional use permit discretionary conditions on a site. They can talk about parking, they can talk about occupancy, they can talk about use. They get to do those things at their sole discretion. We don't have any role or place in that decision-making process. And so my concern is that if we, the sanitary district, start taking discretionary sorts of conditions from another local agency and making them then determinate in how we establish fees and charges, then we're subject to whatever process they come up with in terms of their approvals. Now, if you, the board, want to do that, it's entirely within your power in this sort of condition to say we're counting it as fixture units, or you can say no, we're going to stand and say we're going to count based on our code as the way the boxes stand, and continue forward. And I think I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. I'm going to take it over here. Robert?
Yeah, just want to add a few things that, based on the questioning thus far from other members of the board. I draw your attention to Chapter 1, the definition section, and when you talk about residential, non-residential is the use of a parcel that does not include any habitation. The situation that we have here is all about habitation, whether it is an assisted living occupant or a person who works to care for those people who live in the assisted living units. It's all habitation related. So it's all residential, which is a primary concern of this sanitary agency, because once you have habitation, you have waste. Once you have waste, you have use of the sanitary sewer system. Sanitary sewer system goes to a finite treatment plant that has so much capacity, therefore it needs that the cost of that finite resource has to be spread across proportionally to your user base. That's very simple from that standpoint. I also want to draw your attention to Chapter 3, a section that Director Ulrich mentioned, 301.12.4 mixed-use structures. There's a statement at the beginning of that section which was not highlighted in the discussion. It says a parcel owner's failure to comply with any applicable building and zoning regulation shall not relieve that parcel owner from the responsibility of payment of those sewer fees. That same language is repeated in section 302.7.4 mixed use under commercial uses. So even if you use the argument that the assisted living is a commercial use, it still involves habitation. And that same language is stated right there too, that it doesn't matter whether you comply with the zoning regulations that may be applicable to that unit, they're still not relieved of the duty to pay those sewer service fees. So you look at whatever you have set up in your Chapter 3, it addresses this situation. And to address Director Green's concern that this is somehow out of the box and maybe an anomaly or a hybrid that nobody thought about, Chapter 3 has thought about it. And by definition, and then also by specific regulation, I don't believe you have the leeway other than to go in and change the regulations, which is not agendized for this matter right now.
Okay, Randy, quick.
Okay. Listening to everything that just was discussed here tonight, if if the owner were able to put in a fire door unlocked in between the two upstairs apartments, would that then change it to one dwelling unit?
It can't be a locked door.
No, unlocked fire door.
Right.
There you go. Simple solution.
Okay, I'm going to close the hearing. Now is the time for the board to deliberate and to vote. Jack?
Oh, I thought you wanted to deliberate. I was gonna make a motion.
Well,
See what happens.
if there are no, I already have a request from Mr. Kaiser.
Oh, go ahead, Mr.
I'll
Chairman.
defer to my esteemed colleague over here.
Anyway, I'm gonna take A and B of option 1.
Say that again.
Jack, just to clarify, that is without consideration towards any payment plan.
No, the payment's in there.
No, it's in 2.
It's in option 2.
Oh, is it in option 2?
Yes.
Or what, B, affirm, require the property owners to pay for the district capacity and sewer service fees as outlined in general matters. That's part B of that, A and B.
I think it's a total amount though, if I understand that B correctly,
That's the full amount, isn't it, 16,000?
at one time,
Without the
correct?
payment plan.
So option 1 would be to pay the amount. Option 2 would be to affirm staff's decision, and then you could place conditions on it, and those conditions would be to allow for the payment plan. So if
Scratch that one, go for 2.
You didn't get a second anyway, so you're...
And
Option 2.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Well, let me say something, that this is not the first time that issues from the city have come to us and created a conundrum for us. And I would hope that the Community Development Director and the Planning Commission would have thought through this issue just a little bit more and would not have caused this applicant this kind of pain. Can we have a roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Berg,
Yes.
Mr. Curtis,
Yes.
Mr. Stone,
Yes.
Mr. Kaiser,
Yes.
Mr. Ulrich,
Yes.
Mr. Green,
Yes.
Mr. Baggerly.
Yes. Mr. Perez, you understand everything?
Yes.
Good. Lansing, do you understand?
Yes.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Okay, item 9, information technology equipment. Here they come again, the NAS server replacement.
They're still giving them away too, aren't they?
Some more of that computer stuff.
Oh,
Yeah.
God.
They're so cheap. Why don't you buy 2 instead of 1?
I'm game. One of the things to sort of highlight on this, this is a regular replacement of a server. One of the items to highlight is we have 2 SCADA servers that operate at the treatment plant, and what we call a server A and a server B, because it's a critical component. We had server A fail this weekend, but because of the configuration of the system, server B started up and then ran the system over the weekend. We did have an issue with sort of the flip-flopping back and forth and some graphs and some data getting dropped out. But because we have these kinds of servers and because we have this kind of system, we're able to continue full service through the failure of the server.
So we do need 2.
We do need to.
Good job, Jan.
Yeah. Pete?
Thanks, Jim.
So, put it on another agenda.
Go ahead, Pete.
Thank you. Either Jeff or Jan. Server A that failed, how old was it?
Well, he's talking about a different issue. So he's talking about one of the plant servers, which is an older server, but it's not due for replacement yet. it's a longer story because I actually have the replacement of this. The new one's not in place yet. We're still working on that server replacement. I have it, but it's not fully operational yet.
No, my point was, these servers are critical to the operation, and replacement and keeping them up and running is important. So replacement of this one, which houses all of our CCTV records and so forth, is an important piece. Now, we do tape backups of things, so you know, we don't lose data when we have servers fail, but this time for this server to get replaced, you know, before it does go to failure mode and cause us more significant problems.
This is because we do understand the ultimate truth that hard drives will fail.
Yes, the truth is out there. I did a follow-up question, and that is, are these solid state servers? Why wouldn't we want to go to solid state?
Because this is a 100 terabyte server. I don't think you'd be prepared to spend $200,000 for it, so.
Well, I think the ratepayers would really enjoy that if they heard it.
Not yet, it's coming. It's getting cheaper and cheaper.
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing that clarity to my comment.
I would love to go solid state, but.
Jack?
Do we need a second server?
We have to. They're on a switching
No, but I mean,
schedule.
do you need, you wanted a new one, that'll replace the one there. Were you gonna replace the other one also?
He'll come next year too.
Oh, you'll come back?
They're not on the same schedule.
Clockwork.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say,
They're separated.
Any other questions? Deliberation by the board?
Move to approve.
second,
Roll call, please.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Ulrich?
Yes.
Mr. Kaiser?
Yes.
Mr. Stone?
yes.
Mr. Curtis?
Yes.
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Mr. Bagley?
Yes. Item 10, pre-treatment software purchase for mobile. Let's see, MMM.
So we've talked a number of times about pretreatment and how critical it is that we maintain and have records of inspecting these now 140 businesses that we're tracking. This is the sort of the culmination of being able to do that. We'll be able to get rid of 2 software packages because this will be able to replace those. One is what we call Linko. It's the software package that purely does grease trap inspections at restaurants, but it doesn't do more robust pre-treatment inspections. We'll also be able to get rid of the software package that does our compost windrow management. So all of that will be rolled into this, but this way we'll be able to do you know, our regulated and required pre-treatment inspection documents you know, for these businesses that we're regulating now.
Okay. Pleasure of the board. Discussion, questions?
I'd move for approve.
Second.
Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Byrd?
Yes.
Mr. Curtis?
Yes.
Mr. Stone?
Yes.
Mr. Kaiser?
Yes.
Mr. Ulrich?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Bagley?
Yes. And I think the mobile mixed manure software, that's what, right?
I'll tell them you said that.
That was M&M's.
Item 11, contract number 2018-15, Duke Sales and Service, Inc., root control.
So this is a, you know, an annual contract. We're continuing our route management. Over the years, we've been able to line a number of the worst of the route lines and add some lines in that weren't as bad but are improving in terms of their plugging ability with the routes. And so over time, as we line, we'll sort of get rid of the route contract, but until then, we need to do this every year to push the routes back. Unfortunately, in drought years, the routes are the worst because the sewers are the only water source in the ground. In some areas, we get very high root intrusion during drought years rather than wet years. So this is a regular annual thing and sort of is a maintenance operation to push back those routes.
Pete?
Yeah, question. Jeff, due to the reduced flow that we have going through like truck lines, et cetera, the amount of application, is that gonna, change, dramatically with the amount of flow to where it's, a lesser concentration? that we have to be concerned about? Because I'm concerned about the bugs also down at the treatment plant, so.
No, what we have done over time, and it goes back a number of years, is we've limited the application to 6,000 feet per day. They're using a chemical called diquat, and it's very good at root prevention. But we also have felt that, just doing a massive amount of treatment per day potentially puts, diquat in the waste stream that either A, impacts the plant, or B, gets through the plant and out into the river. And so we've instituted over the years this limitation of 6,000 feet a day. We also do testing of our influent and effluent for diquat before we start the project and during the project to make sure that our application rate is not causing any diquat impacts to the plant or get through the plant out into the river.
Thank you.
Please let David know that I really appreciate him doing this extra work, and it's really necessary because an accident would be catastrophic. Pleasure of the board.
Let's go for it.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Can we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Ulrich?
Yes.
Mr. Kaiser?
Yes.
Mr. Stone?
Yes.
Mr. Curtis?
Yes.
Mr. Berg?
Yes.
Mr. Baggerly?
Yes. Item 12 is resolution number 2018-13 and 2018-14, nomination for regular and alternate member of LAFCO Independent Special District Member. Who wants to do this?
I think we should nominate Russ Baggerly.
Second.
Okay, well, this is two different nominations.
This is
It's for,
for the
there's two different
regular.
positions. This is for
Take the
regular.
regular first.
Okay.
We changed my motion to the regular.
Okay.
Second. Also, you want to get that change?
Have a roll call for that one.
Okay. Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Ulrich?
Yes.
Mr. Kaiser?
Yes.
Mr. Stone?
Yes.
Mr. Curtis?
Yes.
Mr. Berg?
Yes.
Mr. Baggerly?
Yes. Now for the alternate member. Anybody want to throw their hat in the ring or throw where I want?
Move Jack Curtis.
I would thank you, but I will decline. I've already been there 6 years, and
You don't even be an alternate. With all that vast knowledge that you have, Jack.
all is vast. All right, I've been there, and I always like to see someone else go and see what it's all about. And it takes 6 years. You're talking about 2 years as the alternate, that's 4 years on the board.
Right.
I'll do it.
And has anybody ever read the Cortege Knox Hirschberg law? I have.
Year 2000.
Okay, so Pete made a motion to nominate Jack. Did somebody second it?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mr. Berg?
Yes.
Mr. Curtis?
Yes.
Mr. Stone?
Yes.
Mr. Kaiser?
Yes.
Mr. Ulrich?
Yes.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Baggerly?
Yes. Thank you. Item 13, staff review of second unit unpermitted connection enforcement.
At the last board meeting, there was some discussion and a request to sort of have a summary of our unpermitted connection program. And so we've put together this staff report, and I wanted to go over a bit and then answer any questions you may have. When we talk about unpermitted connections, we're really talking about sort of 2 or 3 steps. One, that every unit that is connected to our system, we know about. Secondly, any unit that is connected to our system has paid, where appropriate, capacity charges. And third, every unit that's connected to our system on an ongoing basis, pays the monthly sewer service charges that are then on the annual tax report or the annual tax roll for each of the properties. The unpermitted connection program goes back a number of years. I've looked through the files. There are records going back a couple of decades. It's come back in a couple of different forms over the years, but I think in its present form sort of started right around the time that the upgrades were required for the plant in the mid-90s. And one of the questions that came up was, as the district moved forward with the $27 million design and then construction in 1996, were all of the units in the valley that were connected to the sewer system known, and were all the units in the valley that were connected to the sewer system paying both connection fees, capacity charges, and the monthly sewer service charges? And so there were a number of efforts to try and identify what was connected to the system and what wasn't. Back in those days, it was shortly after the consolidation in 1985, and computerized records and billing records were really not available. They were still doing some of the billing, and some of the records were in paper form. And so some of them were on 3x5 cards.
Yeah. Thank you.
So through the course of both some regulatory discussions here at the board and some staff level efforts to fine-tune the billing records, the unpermitted connection program sort of went through some discussion and some sort of revisions and so forth in the 90s and the early 2000s, and in its present form was fully implemented in 2010 to basically say, hey, we want to make sure that everybody that's connected to the sewer system we know about, and everybody that's connected to the sewer system is paying appropriate and necessary fees. And so in 2010, excuse me, there was an amnesty program where units that had been built, and I can tell you that we see all different kinds. We see units that were completely bootlegged. We see, meaning a property owner somewhere along the line just built a unit. What configuration it had in terms of building permits and so forth sometimes is unknown. But there are units that were built and connected up to the sewer system. We also have a number of units where they went through the appropriate building permit process, the planning permit process, whether that was at the city or the county, got a building permit, built the unit, did everything right from a code perspective, except coming to us and paying fees. Why they didn't come to us and why they didn't pay fees is unknown, and it's varied on every one of these projects, but we see it all the time. So we had an amnesty program in 2010 where somebody could come forward and say, hey, I've got a unit, here's how it's built, here's what it is. We would then log it into our customer service database, go back and do research and figure out when it was connected, what fees were paid, what fees were not paid. But that project was then permitted by us and logged into our system. And when I say permitted, I really mean logged into our system and paid appropriate fees without having to pay any penalties and interest. After that amnesty period expired, we went into sort of where we are today, which is a full sort of unpermitted connection program. Now, some people call it a second unit program. It's really about permits. Whatever the box is and whatever configuration the box is, and whoever approved the box or didn't approve the box, we want to make sure that we know about the box and have it logged into our system and that it's paying fees. At its core, it's about making sure that everybody pays their fair share. If there's 100 units out there that aren't paying, then everybody else is paying for those costs, and those people are connected to the sewer, discharging waste, taking up capacity potentially in the system, and then being subsidized by those that are paying fees. So it's really about making sure everybody pays their fair share. Currently, we get tips from all over about projects that aren't connected to our system. We get little stickies and notes dropped in our mailbox out front. We get them before we had the gates. We had them stuck through the mail slot, you know, or under the door. We get phone calls. We get angry ex-girlfriends who get mad at their boyfriends when they get kicked out of the unit they were renting or not renting. We even got a letter from Santa Claus. I kid you not. So we get these tips from all over the place. Some of them staff finds. Through our normal inspections, through our normal cleaning and maintenance, through our normal sort of being around the valley, we notice things that are under construction. We notice things that, for instance, we'll be doing some cleaning out in front of a property and there'll be 2 mailboxes that say 206 and 206A. We'll go back and look at our database and see that property 206 only is permitted for 1 unit. So we find them a whole different variety of ways. We don't go on private property to look for them. We don't go, you know, we have no inspection powers to just enter people's property. It's really from tips and seeing things from what we can see from the site, or we get a tip in our mailbox. So we then go do research. We go pull property tax records or assessor's numbers, information. We figure out what the paperwork says. And then our first letter is what we call an alleged notice of violation, and it's really a request to inspect the property. We ask for, you know, permission to come in and inspect. Sometimes people are fine, sometimes they're not. I think we've looked at, get the number right, 448 properties that we've looked at since 2010. Of those, 79 were found to have units that we didn't know about. They paid appropriate fees, they became permitted, and they've been added to our database. Every one of these alleged notice of violations that we go to, if we inspect the property and there's a unit there, every owner has the option of taking out something out of that facility so that they don't actually meet the qualifications of being a full unit. Usually that's the kitchen space. People say, hey, I'll just take it out. I don't want to pay the fees. I just use it, you know, as an extra space if I could, but I don't need it, so they take them out. Many of them were found to not be full units, didn't have a kitchen, didn't have, you know, some of the qualifying and identifying units. And so then we issue a letter and say, you know, there's no unit here, everything's fine. All of that documentation is all scanned to our customer service database, and so it forever gets tracked with that property as to what it is. If in the event that there is an additional unit, everybody has the option of paying the fees on these payment plans up to 15 years, and people choose different options along the way. We then update our database and move on. In a couple of cases, I think about 7, the property owner just absolutely refused to let us get an inspection. We'd send a second letter, we'd send a third letter, we'd send a certified letter. They would just completely say, no, you're not coming in. I'm grandfathered in. I don't have to pay fees. You can't come here. Whatever the story is, and we've heard them all. In 7 cases, we have gone then to the Ventura County Superior Court and asked for an inspection warrant to go in and inspect the property. And we have had to follow all the way through that process, I believe on 2, and we have a couple on hold because of our moratorium. But in every case, our goal is to inspect the property and to make sure that if there's a unit there, it's permitted, it's identified. If there's no unit there, that's fine too, and we go on down the road. There's a couple of complicating factors in this, and that is, you know, we're back to sort of discussion about the city of Ojai. They've issued a resolution not requiring will serve letters from us, so we're stuck with another agency where we're not getting information from them proactively, and so we're in a reactive mode, and we have to then identify projects either through construction or asking for through a Freedom of Information Act request to go and inspect their permit files. So it's a little bit difficult, puts us in sort of a detective mode. I wish we didn't have to do it, but we do, to make sure that our records are complete I want to talk just very shortly, and it's not really part of this discussion, is the whole question of ADUs and accessory dwelling units. Our program is an unpermitted connection program. It's not an ADU program, it's not a second unit program, it's not a granny flat program. It's an unpermitted connection. So no matter what the box is called, we want to see it. Some of them, a granny flat typically does not include a kitchen, and so we at least want to see it and document it. If it's an accessory dwelling unit, under that section of the code, the state law, well, an accessory dwelling unit still needs to be permitted and logged into our system in certain circumstances, and we've talked about this before, and we're under a moratorium, so we haven't fully resolved it. But some ADUs may not pay capacity charges. But that hasn't been determined, entirely what the final solution is going to be. But an ADU is just another form of an unpermitted connection. We want to make sure we log it and we know about it, no matter what happens in terms of this other issue with paying capacity charges under state law. We also have a private sewer lateral program. So under about 5 different trigger points, if you sell a house, if you do a major remodel, if you have a business and you get a new business license, a couple of other trigger points, we want to go on the site and look at the sewer lateral and make sure that the lateral from the building to the main is in good working condition and then there are no cracks and problems with the line. The reason for that is those cracks fill up with water during rain events or during high groundwater and surcharge our system with extra water. We have to carry that water, we have to treat that water, and we have to make sure that all that extra water doesn't result in a spill. So if that water gets in, we own it and we have to deal with it. And so we want to make sure that those laterals don't allow that water in and don't surcharge our system. The side benefit of that is that water then stays in the groundwater and serves the bigger, broader purpose of water supply for the valley. So we do those inspections as part of this sewer lateral program. On that program alone, we've looked at 936 properties. So between the two, and there's a little bit of overlap, we've looked at well more than 1,000 units around the valley when it comes to second units or laterals. So I think we're having an impact in finding and identifying and logging the number of units that are on our system. We're also having an impact in terms of finding potentially cracked and damaged lines that cause other problems. So the other thing I wanted to touch on briefly is we have Carollo engineers working and looking at our sewer rates. And really what they're looking at is, given some changes that are occurring in the industry in the state of California, are there other ways to bill for services that in some way are proportional and fit both our system and within state law? A long conference call with them, that study's ongoing here late last week, and just got a detailed memo which we'll bring to the ordinance committee for discussion here probably in the next 2 weeks to talk about that preliminary study. One of the common other ways to look at rates is through water use. If you use so many gallons of water, how many of those gallons turn into going through the sewer, and would that be a more accurate way of billing for sewer rates? And there are some problems with that. The first is that you assume, based on how much water somebody uses, what is the return to sewer? And that's a technical term. How many gallons go back to the sewer? So if you use 100 gallons, what's the assumption of how many of those gallons end up in the sewer? So it's also based on an assumption. The second part, and the more problematic part, is water use by residential customers is actually private under state law. So we, as a special district, can't go to Casitas or Ventura River or Miners Oaks or any one of the other 16 water districts and mutuals that serve in our area and say, give me all the water data for all your parcels and we're going to use it to bill people. We can't get that. It's illegal. So a city can. Now the city of Ventura, since they own their own water system and they own the data that the water users in their system use, they can transfer that data across the little hallway over to the sewer department, so to speak, and then bill those customers that way. So it's legal for the city of Ventura to do it because they own that water data. It's not legal for us to do it. So we can't even get the water data. So that's just one limitation on it. And there's about 5 or 6 major ways of billing that are used throughout the state. We'll bring those to you for more discussion and see what's appropriate. The other thing that sort of impacts us right now is because of the changing laws under the accessory dwelling units, the ADU system of laws, is we're under a moratorium. Beginning late in 2017, we stopped doing enforcement actions, and in January of this year, we put a moratorium on issuing permits for new units while we resolve the legal issues that go with ADUs. There was about 20 properties that had already been issued some form of request to inspect through an alleged notice of violation, and those were all put on hold. We've not done any more inspections there. We've not assessed any penalties, no interest, no nothing for any of those 20 units. Since that moratorium was put in place, we've collected a list of about 50 properties that potentially may have unpermitted units in some form or another, some of them ADUs, some of them in other forms. And so we have this list of about 70 properties that we're not doing any inspections on, we're not collecting any fees, we're not accruing any interest or penalties or anything. They're completely on hold while we go forward. So, you know, that program here, hopefully we'll be able to make some answers here in the next couple of months and deal with the ordinance changes that are necessary to comply with the ADU legislation, and then restart our unpermitted connection program, starting with those 70 properties.
This issue of the tiny homes, because they are mobile and they're not permanently connected to anything legally, do we have an approach that would say this is the way we're going to deal with a tiny home? How do we charge them for hookup to the sewer? And if they're not hooked up to a sewer, what are they hooked up to?
Well, I don't want to get too far into the ADU legislation, but I will say that absent the ADU discussion, completely absent, a tiny home under some codes in the state is a trailer. It's an RV. It's subject to DMV regulations. So a tiny home is no different than, in practical terms, an RV trailer that is in any other configuration. Just because it has shingles on the top of it or looks different with wood exterior rather than a shiny silver Airstream, from a practical functional standpoint, it's an RV. You know, we go back to the discussion we had on the 602 property. If you look at the function of the box, it's a dwelling unit on wheels. That's what it is. You can call it a tiny home, you can call it anything you want. I look at it as an RV. It meets the definition of an RV, and it would then be under the code, in our code here, as an RV. So I'll leave that at that point. And
does that mean it's covered by the vehicle department?
A trailer, and that's got a license and got wheels, is an RV. And so it's regulated by the DMV. We don't care what it's regulated by. We don't care what the DMV requires it to have, whether it requires brake lights or turn lights or whatever. Those are DMV questions. Our code says if you have an RV and you're connected to the sewer for more than 30 days, you pay full capacity charges. Now, if you have your trailer in your backyard and you're not connected to the sewer and you're living in it, it's really up to environmental health where the waste is going and how the waste is being handled. If you're not connected to the sewer, you're not connected to the sewer. So if people want to start living in trailers in their backyards not connected to sewer, Well, then I suppose when the tanks fill up, then there's, you know, a problem to deal with, but that's not our problem. We only care about if you're connected to the sewer. So I'll leave those land use questions and those land use appropriateness kind of discussions between agencies that want to approve them and environmental health that will deal with the waste from them if they're not connected to the sewer. If they're connected to the sewer, they're going to pay fees.
Now, let me just back up one step. When you say they're gonna pay fees, does that mean that they're gonna pay connection fees or just service fees?
Under our code today, an RV that's connected to the sewer more than 30 days pays a capacity charge and pays monthly sewer service charges. Now, we have 16 mobile home parks in town. If you go around and you look at many of those mobile home parks, in many of them, the actual unit that's in the space is an RV trailer. Some of them, of course, are double wides and single wides under mobile home sorts of typical configurations. But many of them are connected to the sewer and are just an RV trailer parked in the space. They are paying or paid capacity charges to connect to the sewer, and they each pay monthly sewer service charges. And I can tell you, from the mobile home park up here by the Deer Lodge in Miners Oaks, all the way to the mobile home parks down on the avenue in Casita Springs and down onto, you know, into the Ventura Avenue area, there are mobile homes that are actually RV trailers. They don't have the pop-outs and all the fancy stuff. They're individual RV trailers parked in a space, paying full fees. So we already have this system in our, or these types of configurations all over our sewer system, and they all have paid capacity charges, and they all pay monthly sewer service charges. There's been no allowance for just because it's silver or it's not, or it's got shingles on it or it's not. There is none of that in our code. There's none of those definitions. There's none of that distinction in our code about different looks or different names for RV trailers.
And there's no consideration of size, correct?
In our current code, no.
And it doesn't matter whether or not they have a bead separator for their doorway. They'll get in the slack.
Now,
Go ahead, Jeff.
One of the things that Carollo is looking at is there evidence statewide somewhere that we can bring forward for discussion at our board about size of units. And it's all over the board, and I don't want to get into a big long discussion. It's really something for the ordinance committee to start working with, but it's something we're going to look at and on a go-forward basis figure out if there's something that is proportional and appropriate for our district to at least make some review of. The last piece of the discussion of unpermitted connections relates to current board members. We have looked at a number of people throughout the valley and their properties for unpermitted connection based on tips that we received or some sort of process that resulted in an investigation. This includes city council members. This includes Ojai Valley Sanitary District board members. I have been personally called by two people reporting Randy Burke. I've been to his house twice. I've inspected his house twice. He does not have second units on his property. He does not meet his property is permitted for one. He only has one, and that has been documented. We recently received, back in April, a letter from Chet Hilgers alleging that Stan Green had more units on his property than he was paying for. Stan Green, his property, and the date of the letter was received post-moratorium. So the issue of Stan Green's property, he's one of the 70 properties that is in limbo while we go through the moratorium discussions and figure out what we're going to do first with those issues, and then we will restart that program. Stan Green's property will be inspected the same way the 480 have been inspected, 448 have been inspected under our unpermitted connection program, and the same exact process that we followed on Randy Berg's property. We have not contacted Chet Hilgers back because we don't contact anybody that provides us a tip. Never have, never will. We think that what happens on each property is a private matter. Many of the properties don't have units, so therefore it's really not appropriate for us to advertise any of the 448 nor call back a tip master, that calls us in. So we did not call him back. The third board member who has or is in under our unpermitted connection program is Bill Ulrich. We received 2 tips for 2 different properties for Bill Ulrich. Both of those properties issues were started before the moratorium, but both of those properties have been, all activity has ceased since the moratorium's been in place, and it's on hold. There's no new inspections, there's no penalties, there's no interest accruing while we go through this ADU issue. Again, his 2 properties are among the 70 that we are put on hold as we go through the process. But when we restart, we'll restart those. Anybody who's on that list, those 70, and anybody who we've gone through and looked at before, the 448, all follow the same process. We get a tip, we follow up on it, we inspect the property, we make a determination of whether or not it meets the definition of a dwelling unit. The owner has provided the options to take it out. If they want to keep it, they're offered the opportunity to finance it up to the 15 years, as we talked about with the Perez property on Oak Street, and then we document it and log that property in our customer service database and go forward. So I think that we've done this on 448 properties. We have 70 on the list that are on hold, and we have 3 board members that we have in some way come across. I have a couple of other prominent people in town, and including a city council member, and we followed exactly the same process on every one of these 448 properties. We will continue to do that, and we don't make any of the information public. There was a specific request on the board members, so we've outlined where we are with those 3, and we'll follow through appropriately individually on those 3 properties.
Is that your conclusion?
That's my conclusion.
Thank you. Any comments by the board?
I had a couple questions.
Go ahead, Pete.
Jeff, those particular properties that have gone through some level of deconditioning, fixtures, etc.
Yeah.
We would only go back out of those properties if there was a complaint that was logged, or is there something in the paperwork that says that we may come back to your property to re-inspect to confirm that there's been a true adherence to the decommissioning of those particular fixtures, etc.
So if we inspect a property owner, it meets the definition of a dwelling unit, and the property owner says, you know what, I don't want to pay the fees, what do I have to do to sort of quote unquote take it out? We help them through the process in their particular consideration and configuration, take out whatever meets the definition of the dwelling unit, and then they sign what's called a cease agreement, and they agree to, in return for taking it out and us not charging fees, that it's sort of no fees are due, but they agree to not put it back in. We have not gone back. Our program has not ever developed a process to go back and re-inspect those ceases unless we get a second complaint, or unless we get something that would identify us as a reason to go back to those. We just didn't feel it's appropriate to, from a sewer perspective, go back and do re-inspections on the CISAs in 3 years or something, that we felt that it would be reasonable if the person said, I'm not going to do it, I'm taking it out, that was a reasonable approach to that individual property. So we have 84, on page 78, 84 properties have taken out those unpermitted components and signed cease agreements that we have on record.
If a property owner were to violate the cease agreement, what's the penalty for that?
Our cease agreement does have procedures in it in terms of both having to pay capacity charges and back sewer service charges and some penalties and interest. Our code specifically documents what that is.
The second question was, notwithstanding the existing moratorium that we have, is there anything that in the way of these dwellings can be grandfathered in based upon they were pre-existing building code, etc.?
One of the things that we've done is if we get a tip on a property and we go out there and there is 2 units, and what we always say to the person is, if you can provide us information that in some way shows that second unit, unpermitted unit, whatever form it is, granny flat, ADU, you can call it whatever you want, but that unpermitted unit was in fact permitted at some point prior, then we would grandfather that in. And I'll give you an example. When the sanitary districts were built in the 60s, and they went down the street and they put in the main line and they started connecting up the houses and connecting up existing houses that were on septic, there are some houses that tax records from back then, the 60s, show that at the time the main was put in and the time the lateral was put into that unit, there were 2 permitted dwelling units on that property at that time. And our rationale is that if the sanitary district that built the system went down the street, walked up to the front door and said, we're connecting you up to sewer, and it was clearly known through building permits and tax assessor records that 2 units existed on that property at the time of that sewer connection, we then adjust our records to say that property is permitted for 2 units. Now, it may not have paid sewer service charges from 1962 or whenever till today. And the way we have dealt with that is to say, we've now found it now. Going forward, you now pay from this day forward now 2 sewer service charges, 1 for each of the 2 units. But we're not going to go back and charge you a capacity charge, because we're going to say the professional who did that at the time knew there were 2, because 2 existed because the tax record said there was 2. And so we're not going to get into, well, who was the inspector in 1964, and what did he see, and what did he or she decide to do, and why did they decide only to list 1 instead of 2? We can't ever know what that was, but we're going to accept the fact that when the buildings were connected to the sewer at that original time, that 2 existed. They should have known there was 2 existed. The tax record said there were 2 existed. So we're going to accept that as today. And so a number of these cases, we find that. And so now what we do is we permit that property for 2, and on a go-forward basis, then you pay 2 sewer service charges, the $54 a month, on the tax records going forward. And so we find some of those, but we only do it where there is enough written information to document that those 2 actually existed. We get all the time, oh yeah, it's been known, everything is fine, it's been 2 forever, but we can't find any record whatsoever of it. I mean, nothing. And we give the property owner, enough leeway. Hey, go to your title company. Bring us a title policy that says 2 existed. Bring us a tax record that says 2 existed. Bring us a building permit that said 2 existed. We're willing to accept reasonable and appropriate information to document the 2.
hands in concrete with 1962 or before that.
Well, and so there are enough, but it's not just that the building existed, but that it was an independent dwelling unit. It might have been a garage. So we need a tax record that says 2 buildings, 2 boxes, 2 kitchens, 2 fully independent dwelling units. It's not just that 2, buildings were on the site, or 3 or 5 or whatever. It has to document that there was actually 2 livable, fully functional, independent living spaces. And so we find, going through a community like the Ojai Valley, there's a lot of old construction. And so there's a lot of different variations of this discussion, and we go through them all the time.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Jeff?
Just a little comment on that. One of the things that was really prevalent here in the Ojai Valley was for someone to come and get a permit to build a garage. They built the garage, they lived in the garage while they were building the house. And so later on, they may have said, well, we'll make a car shed and we'll do that for the garage, and there's your second unit. Now, the other thing, in Miners Oaks, you didn't pay for a capacity charge, you paid a lateral fee. Everybody paid so much a foot for the lateral from the main line to the property line. That was the connection fee. So there would be no information regarding a second unit.
Well,
that's all they paid for.
Well, but
and that's what was inspected when you hooked up.
Well, and if the records at the time you hooked up, if a different record, if a tax record says, at this address, there were actually 2 livable boxes.
Yeah.
We would permit those 2 livable boxes, and now on a go-forward basis, they would pay for 2. Just because it was built in 1960s something, and 2 boxes were there and it was connected there, doesn't mean forever you only have to pay for 1. You have 2 boxes. Yeah. And so that's the kind of decision-making and configuration discussions that we've had. We got a lot of property to go. It's an ongoing program. And almost everyone is a unique, they're all very unique. We didn't have, back in the 60s and even currently, we didn't have where they built subdivisions and built them all the same. So we can say, oh, that house and that house and that house are all the same. Everyone was a one-off. And so the records are all one-offs. And we go through this, very unique sort of specific discussion on each and every property. But we're going to continue. We'll restart when the moratorium is lifted. The 70 properties will then be restarted, and we'll continue on with our efforts. Those are going to include restarting of probably the Freedom of Information Act request to the City of Ojai to get their permit records because they're not being sent to us. And we'll continue to find units however we need to find them to be appropriate, to make sure that every property is correctly logged into our system and is correctly identified and is correctly and proportionally paying the fees that are due to the system.
Any other questions? And we'll move on
I
to...
guess I was just going to ask him a question about something. If the reverse was true, that somebody was paying the service fees for a number of years, and the records on when it started or when the connection was made are in a wind somewhere or not available, how do you deal with that? Obviously, there's a recognition that there is another connection or another building or whatever it is that's been connected and its charges have been paid month by month. That's different than they haven't paid those and they did pay a connection. I'm just asking, how far back can you go in order to establish the existence of a sewer line?
Well, we haven't run across one yet where someone had paid a connection fee, was paying sewer service charge fees, and the property did, and there wasn't a unit there. So we have not gotten into a discussion where there is the potential for some sort of back-in-time refund of...
No, I don't mean a refund, I'm just mean that the reverse was true, that service charges were paid over all the years, but they can't come up with a record of a connection.
Well, like I said, if someone was paying sewer service charges, we would assume that they had paid. One of the things we do not have, primarily in the city of Ojai, is we don't know when each unit was built and when each unit paid a sewer connection fee, capacity charge fee, and what was the fee they paid. Because that city started in the 1920s and consolidated with us in 1985. So between 1920 and 1985, a lot of boxes were built, a lot of boxes were connected to the sewer, a lot of boxes paid a fee. We don't know what they paid. Some unit on some street in 1945 paid $5 or $50. We don't know. We have no idea what they paid. Literally, when the city of Ojai consolidated with us, the entire sum of the records we got was a bunch of shoe boxes full of 3x5 cards that had a card for each address. And literally, the code, it didn't say, this property bought connection fee on this date and paid this much. It's not that. It's literally hieroglyphics. It says 2A, 1S, D. And it has the address. So we have no idea what day that unit was actually built, what day it was connected to the sewer, how much it paid in terms of capacity charges. We have no idea.
Jeff, I'm sorry, but this discussion is way off.
No, but I want to answer the question. So back in time, we don't know.
Thank you, that's it.
I have a question. For the record, in the interest of clarity in the narrative, you went out, according to the report, went out to Board Member Burks twice.
We're not gonna get into that.
Excuse
We
me,
don't want
Russ,
to do
excuse me.
individual discussions about those. There's
It's
no action
a
to take
board,
here.
excuse me, it's an agendized item. I'm entitled to discuss it. And
Robert,
I'm not
do we
entitled
need
to get
discuss
stepped on
this?
about it.
If he wants to do it, I'm going to allow Director Weirick to walk down this path.
Excuse me?
I'm going to allow you to walk down the path.
Thank you. Did you go out to Board Member Green's property?
No.
Did you go out to my property on Gridley Road?
Yes.
And what determinations were made at that time?
We haven't finished determinations and finalized any issues on your property at all, both your property on Fulton and your property on Gridley Road.
Okay. You made no determination or statement at the time that you visited. That was the second visit, as I recall. Lori came out once on her own.
There were a number of visits to your property. There have been a number of letter conversations back and forth. There have been a number of back and forth discussions about finalizing the circumstances of your property on Gridley Road. There have been no actions whatsoever taken in terms of inspections on Fulton, and all of those things have not been finalized, and they're under the complete on hold process while we go through the moratorium.
Thank you. Thank you for the path.
Okay. We're going to move on to the information items. Is there anything that the board members would like to discuss? On items 14 through 21. I would like to ask a question about 14.
Right.
All the experiments that we did for coming up with different ways of compliance with the TMDL, Are those all going to be part and parcel of the compliance and facilities plan update?
Yes. All of the data and all of the data points and sampling from all of those pilot tests, both summer, winter, the 3 different volumes, the addition of the micro C carbon food additive, all of that information is available and has already been made available to the 2 consultants we're interviewing this week.
And are these still advanced Bardenfo treatment?
Yes, we're really what I simplistically call a 3-box system, and Bardenfo is a biological system configuration of treatment, and there's a 3-step Bardenfo, and we're looking at probably in order to meet these requirements and regulations going to a 5-box system, and the addition of some sort of food additive, micro C, is a commercially available product. It's like a glycerin, it's like a sugar for the bugs to eat to do their work. That's an overly simplified process. Detention time, aeration, other things come into play that will sort of determine how we sort of advance our system.
UV infiltration will remain the same?
We believe so. We have added a particle counter into our turbidity process, and so not only are we looking purely at turbidity and filtration, but we're looking at various counts of various size micron particles, and we're watching that as well as turbidity and filtration. So we think filtration and this turbidity UV system will work. The interesting thing that comes into play, and I mentioned it in an ordinance committee meeting, and it caused quite a little question from you. Our system in the early 1990s, they tested the flow, and they looked at what was coming down our influent, and BOD was running in the 240 parts per million range. BOD is a measure of essentially how much oxygen the bugs need to consume the pollutants. So it's usually a 5-day test at certain temperatures, and you look at how much oxygen the bugs, while they're breathing and they're eating the grease, how that decays over time. Well, we were at 240 in the early 1990s, and the plant was designed around that as an average sort of flow. We're now hitting high numbers in the 400s. And so the bugs need more oxygen and they need more detention time to do the same amount of work. The end result is, given the size of the various oxidation ditch tanks, the plant capacity, one of the consultants has modeled in a chemistry model, that the capacity of the plant is only 1.8 million gallons a day, not 3 million gallons a day, because that capacity is consumed by needing more detention time and more oxygen to achieve the same results. So as we go through the process of this facilities plan and dealing with the ammonia and the nitrates, we're also going to have to deal with the issue of this changing and increasing loading that we're getting, and potentially going to some sort of different aeration system so that the bugs can get more oxygen in a more efficient manner to do their work, and then boost that capacity back up. The reason we have this capacity problem is our aeration system is probably inefficient for the current loading that we're getting.
If our plant design capacity has been reduced from 3 million to 1.8, does that affect the requirements of the loan from the feds to rebuild the
No, because
plant?
there's ways to solve the problem, and that is to just change our aeration. We haven't actually change the plant capacity. It's a functional capacity, and there are ways to boost that capacity back up to achieve the same 3.0 MGD normal weather flow.
Thank you. That's good. Jack?
On that, will the work that Corolla's going to be doing, will they be working on that additional 1.2 million gallons when they make their recommendation on how they're going to handle this? Or are we betting on when the drought is over and we start getting a little more water down the drain, that's going to help us with lower the BOD?
Well, we're interviewing 2 firms this week to decide who will be the selected firm for the capacity. It was Corolla who identified the 1.8 million gallon issue, but Stantec MWH has also provided some information that's very critical in this process. So we're going to interview both of the firms. But we're not going to count on the flow going back up, and I think prudently, given drought restrictions, given behavioral changes, people are changing their core behaviors. Plumbing fixture flows are changing. We may see a little rise in our flow post-drought in a miracle sort of scenario from if water supply goes up, but I don't think we're going up in flow. Our growth is going down. Our population is aging. Family size and occupancy in houses is going down. And there's nothing on the demographic sort of horizon that's telling us that we're going to have a changing population in our system that is going to change our flow in a dramatic way back up.
What about the septic tank, the potential?
If the septic tank comes up and we get added, then we'll renegotiate our permit conditions with the regional board. We have a permit opener in our permit with the regional board that if we take more flow, we're allowed to increase our nitrogen and phosphorus limits on our discharge permit.
Is there any date for the health department, county health department, to come up with that report?
The original deadline was 2017. Given the fire and given the fact that the drought occurred, the health department had a plan to go out and sample both groundwater and surface waters to see if there were markers identified that would show that septics are actually having an impact on both groundwater and surface water. But given groundwater and surface water conditions with the fire and the wells, they're not able to get that data. That deadline has been extended out to 2024.
Wow.
Just be aware that the drought is not over until Lake Acetus fills and spills.
Good luck.
Yeah. We'll never see it.
Maybe not.
So no, there is nothing on the immediate horizon given some idea that the septics are going to be adjudicated in some form one way or the other in the immediate future, and that we're going to see some large-scale conversion of septic to sewer. I think before 2024 would be
Optimistic.
yeah.
Yeah, we still have the capacity of 3 million gallons in the plant. We just don't have the ability to treat it, correct?
We have the flow capacity.
Flow capacity.
We don't have the BOD treatment capacity given our current aeration configuration.
Yeah.
We've got 2 aeration tanks now, right?
We have 2 oxidation ditches. At each end there's a fan, a propeller in the water, and that fan sort of beats the surface of the water, thereby entraining air in the system. It's very inefficient.
3 more?
Well, what we really need to do is replace those fans with like what we call fine bubbly aeration. The air stones in the fish tank kind of scenario.
Or pure oxygen, one of the 2.
Yeah, we're not going to operate with pure oxygen.
Okay, are there any more comments on items 15 through 21? Then we'll move to item 22, board member and general manager comments. Board member. Bill.
I have a comment and then I guess a follow-up question. We've had our videographer here for a few months now, and I have not yet heard where this data is being stored or how ratepayers can get a copy of that. Do we know?
I have not been told that yet.
It's a secret.
Could you, if he's gonna say something on the record, he should get up here and say
Oh,
his name.
yeah, I'm happy
Could
to
you,
go.
could you state your name for the
Sure.
record and give your answer?
Sure, I'll even put the camera on me.
Get a good shot.
Yeah, I'll get my good side.
Yeah, I'm Ray Powers, City of Ojai. I have been here videotaping. So far, what I've been told, because I'm a service for hire, so who I've been talking to is Ojai Valley News. There's potential for it to go on their server, and then there'll be a link on the Ojai Valley News website for people to see the archives of this meeting, of the transition, Ojai meetings from Carnegie Mellon, from the Casitas Municipal Water District meetings I've been videotaping as well. And there's also been a conversation with the Ojai Valley Green Coalition that I may go on their website too. So right now, I'm in possession of all of them. City Council Bill Weirick has a couple of them from a couple months ago, but pretty much I have them all on my external drive. And then when whoever I'm told to deliver them to for upload, that's going to happen. But I believe this week, Ojai Valley News is going to be putting them up. How soon the website will have a link on it, I'm not sure. But I got an email this morning regarding that.
Great. You get to watch them at home when you're, never mind.
I get to watch them multiple times as I edit and colorize.
They're edited.
Colorize.
Yeah, I don't know that there's any
Post-production.
editing that needs to be done, but.
No fake news, it's all exactly what you.
Any other board members have?
Thank you.
Since he heard it.
I say, why can't we get a copy of this stuff to have for our files so that we can show this what it was in case they want to edit things out down the road and use them against us?
We don't, the videos that are being recorded are not being done by the Ojai Valley Sanitary District. They're being done entirely by Ray as a private service for someone. We keep a copy of our audio records so that, and those are fully available to the public. It usually takes us a couple hours on the day following the meeting to make those available. If the public wants to come and get them, they can get a copy of the CD, but we have a record of those meetings fully recorded, at least on the sound perspective, for 4 years.
All I gotta say is a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Jack, you don't suspect that they would change them?
Pardon me?
You don't suspect they would change them to use them in some various ways?
It could be done.
Paris just thought,
Bob, did you want to say something?
On the record, I'm Bob Daddy. I own the Ojai Valley News. These were not commissioned for the Ojai Valley News.
We're not.
We were asked if we would go ahead and post them up because we have a website, we have a paper, we'll do all that stuff. And that's what our involvement is. And
Who owns?
we haven't got.
who owns this?
I don't know. We don't have any of that information yet. We supposedly, they'd like to post it up and we'll wait in here. And then we'll have to figure out what we do and what about the copyright and what do we do about this and how do we integrate it. So no, we haven't started any of this.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other comments by board members, we'll let the general manager tell us what he wants to tell us.
I got a couple of comments. We're going to have the interviews of the TMDL consultants this week. We've been interviewing staff for our position open at the treatment plant. Had a number of promising interviews. We've received our new air compressor. It's ready to be installed. We've received our EQ basin pumps. They're ready to be installed. We've received storm drain plant drain pumps, and the chlorine contact chamber butterfly valves are supposed to be here this week. We plan to have all those in place before the winter so that those components are being replaced. We had a meeting with Dennis True. I don't know if you recall who he is. Many of you know him from the Baldwin siphon drilling under the river. He is a drilling expert out of Colorado, has probably 45 years drilling and directional drilling pipe all over the United States of all sorts. We had him, he was out in town working on another project. We had him in to look at the Kunkel Creek project and whether or not we could drill that. It's about 1,200 feet of drilling. Dennis believes he can drill it even though it's through cobble. It will require a bigger drill and a bigger drill pipe than some of these Vermeer, the little driller you see doing the gas line in Ojai. It won't have the horsepower or the strength, but Dennis believes he can drill it, so we're going to do sort of an initial assessment and have an initial design done to see if we can do that from the bottom and drill up. So we'll be doing some stuff on that. The last thing I want to sort of address is I've gotten a ripple of a rumor around the valley, and I thought I'd just say it all to the board all at the same time. There is a ripple of a rumor that the Ojai Valley Inn would like to do recycled water, and the comment was that we're not helping them. So I want to give just a brief, it's not agendized, but I want to give you sort of an information update. It came up again today, and I wanted to give you just all, so you'd all hear it at the same time. About 10 years ago, the Ojai Valley Inn did an expansion project and built some facilities on their site, and at the time, there was some conversation with them about transitioning from a ERU, counting fixture units, to a flow-based billing system like we do at Pepsi. If your commercial unit generates over 25,000 gallons a day, we will test their flow strength and their flow volume and bill them that way, and it would require a manhole to have a meter in it and a sampling piece of sampling equipment in it. And that meter was built and installed about 10 years ago. Nothing ever came of it. There were some conversations, went back and forth. About 4 years ago, I was having some conversations with Ian about another topic, and the issue came up, and I told them that if they wanted to reclaim their water, that it was entirely up to them. We don't regulate it, we don't permit it, we don't have any authority over whether or not they do it. If you want to put in a gray water system at your house, it's between you and the building officials about that. We can't approve it, disapprove it, start it, stop it, anything. So I told Ian that. There are several other entities around the valley, Kate School, Ojai Valley School, Thatcher, all have their own package treatment plants and all do their own individual treatment. I told Ian the same thing. If they wanted to do it and use the water to water their grass, it's entirely up to them. We have no role in that. All we do have a role in is whatever you do give us after you've built your plant and done your scalping or whatever, recycling, whatever you do give to us, we would bill according to what you give us. Went away. Haven't heard anything in about 4 years on it, or I don't know when the date was. But over about a month and a half ago or something, the ripple started again, a couple of questions. And I had the same answer. We don't permit it. We don't approve it, disapprove it, fund it, not fund it. It's entirely up to them. If they want to build it, it's a waste treatment plant. They would have to get a permit from the regional board, just like Ojai Valley School or Thatcher, and they could run it. Now VRSD, under contract, operates some of those small package plants at those schools. And so VRSD could be hired to run the plant for them, or the inn could run the plant themselves, use the water, whatever, however they wanted to, and give us their waste. So I don't know where the rumor's starting. I don't know where it's coming from, but it's floating around out there. And I would say the same thing to you that I would say to them. They've never come to me in the past month and a half. It's coming from other sources. That we have nothing to do with it. They want to do it, it's entirely up to them. So I passed that word on to the few people that the ripple of the rumor has come from in the past little month and a half. And if the inn is interested, I'll be happy to tell them that and give them some contact information. But we don't have a role in any way funding, approving, operating, permitting, regulating anything to do with the Ojai Valley Inn
I can
treating
imagine
their flows.
how that started. You can be talking to somebody and say, we don't permit it, and they don't hear anything else. That means if you don't permit it, it's not permitted. You can't do it.
I know, but it's come back several ways from several different sources, and so I just wanted to tell you exactly what I've told them, and hopefully, if someone's interested, they can come by and ask.
I'll ask Chris to come up and talk to the Ojai Valley Inn and see if they want to do it, because they can take care of it.
Right. Well, all of your report, it sounded like Rick and Bradshaw were getting all the goodies. Isn't there anything for the collection system?
No.
No. God. Sorry, Mark.
Root treatment.
Root treat.
Yeah, we got Dukes.
That's all I have.
Thank you.
Stuck on the truck.
Are there any other comments by the board members? If not, this meeting is adjourned at 8:21. And thank you all for coming.